He was crouched in the dirt, studying a beetle, not looking at me, not looking at the man who had just walked into my garden uninvited. Just crouched there in his little mud-covered boots, completely absorbed in the beetle, the way 2-year-olds were absorbed in things, with the full force of their entire undivided universe. I heard the gate open behind me. I heard the footsteps stop, and then I heard silence. The specific silence of a man who has just seen something that has knocked the breath clean out of him. I turned slowly. Dren Vael stood at my garden gate. He had not changed. That was the first thing I noticed, with the particular fury that comes from wanting someone to have suffered more visibly. 3 years, and he still had the same jaw, the same dark eyes, the same way of standing that said, "I carry authority the way other people carry wallets," automatically, without thinking about it. But his face was doing something I had never seen it do in the 3 years I had known him. It was completely unguarded. He was looking at my son who had his jaw, my son who had his dark eyes, my son who was 2.5 years old and had never met his father and was currently, without any awareness of the magnitude of the moment, attempting to convince a beetle to walk onto his finger. I let the silence sit for exactly long enough. Then I said, "You should have called first." And the look on his face, the fractured, undone look of a man encountering the full weight of the choice he made 3 years ago, told me everything about what the next conversation was going to cost both of us. If you have ever watched someone walk back into your life and realize in an instant what they threw away, you need to stay with this story. Like the video, hit that subscribe button right now, and drop in the comments where you are watching from. People from every corner of the world are already in the comments. Let's get into this. My name is Calla Voss. I want to tell you who I was before Dren, because the before matters almost as much as the after, and because who I was before is also who I became again. Just bigger, just more solid, in the specific way that grief either breaks you or builds you into something that cannot be easily broken. I grew up in a small pack called Greyfen, tucked into the western edge of the Northern Territories where the mountains met the flatlands and the winters were long, and the wolves who survived them had a particular quality of patience that I have always thought of as the Greyfen quality. Not stubbornness, patience. The understanding that things took the time they took and resisting that fact was expensive. My parents were healers. Both of them. My father, Ro, did the wolf medicine. My mother, Suna, handled the herbal pharmacy, the compound library, the plant cultivation, the specific, detailed knowledge of what grew where and what it did and what happened when you combined it with something else. They ran their practice out of the stone building behind our house, and they raised me and my brother Daff in the specific, absorbed way of people who were always working, but who somehow managed to make the work feel like inclusion rather than neglect. I wanted to be a healer from the time I was 7, not because my parents were, or not only because of that, because healing was interesting, because the body was a system, and systems had logic, and logic could be learned and applied and refined, and the refinement produced outcomes that were sometimes extraordinary. I liked the outcomes. I liked the moment when something stopped being wrong and started being right. The specific satisfaction of an intervention working exactly as intended. I studied at the Northern Institute for 4 years. I came home to Greyfen for the first year of my practice. And then, at 23, I took a placement at Harwick Pack. Harwick was larger than Greyfen, more complex. A pack in the middle of a territorial expansion period, growing fast, dealing with the specific complications of a community that is trying to be bigger than it has been while still being what it is. And Harwick was where I met Dren Vael. He was 28 when I arrived. Alpha of Harwick for 2 years, inherited from his father, carrying the position with the specific certainty of a man who had been raised for it and had found that the raising had been accurate. He was suited to it, the work suited him, and the match between a person and their work, when it was genuine, produced something that was visible in every room they entered. He was not the first alpha I had worked with. Greyfen had an alpha. The institute had faculty who held Alpha rank. I was not dazzled by the title. But Dren Vael was not a title. He was a person who happened to hold the title, and the person was someone I had not expected. He came to the healing house in my 3rd week. Routine wellness check. Alphas were supposed to have them quarterly, and some did, and some didn't. And Harwick's Alpha apparently fell in the category of alphas who believed in modeling the protocols they expected their pack to follow. We were in the examination room for 40 minutes. We talked for 30 of them. Not about medicine. He asked about Greyfen, about my training, about what I found interesting in the work. He asked with the specific quality of attention that distinguished genuine interest from polite inquiry, and I answered with the specific quality of openness that I reserved for people who seemed worth being open with. When he left, I noticed I was looking forward to the next appointment. The next appointment came in 4 weeks, and the one after that. The mate bond arrived at the 5th appointment, which I have always thought was either very convenient timing or the moon goddess's particular sense of humor, given that the bond's arrival was the thing that ended the conversation we had been having and started a different, much more significant one. It arrived the way it always arrived, sudden, total, the door blown open. I had heard it described many times. I had felt, theoretically, prepared for it. I was not prepared for it. Neither was he. What followed was the most significant year of my life. That is not hyperbole. It is the accurate assessment of someone who has had subsequent years that were also significant. Grief years, building years, the year my son was born, and the world reorganized itself around the new weight of him. And who was comparing them honestly? It was significant because Dren was. He was the person I had been trying to describe when I used the word interesting. He was interested in everything, the way I was interested in everything, but his everything was different from my everything, and so together we covered more ground than either of us could have covered alone. He read. He thought. He asked questions that were better than the questions most people asked because he had already thought past the obvious question to the one that was underneath it. We were, by every measure the wolf world offered for assessing these things, a match. The bond said so. The daily evidence said so. I had never been so certain of anything. And I had never, therefore, been so vulnerable to what happened next. Her name was Petra Ashford. She had grown up in Harwick. Had been Dren's first love. They had been together for 2 years, from ages 17 to 19, before she had left the pack to study in the Eastern Territories. A genuine leaving, a genuine life built elsewhere, a genuine choice to be somewhere that was not Harwick. She had come back at 25. I had been at Harwick for 11 months. I had been bonded to Dren for 8 of them. I had been 8 weeks pregnant for 3 of those 8. I want to be specific about the timeline because the timeline matters. Not to build a case. I am not building a case against anyone. The timeline matters because it shows that I was not naive, that this was not something I should have seen coming. I had 8 months of a genuine bond, 8 months of the specific, building evidence of 2 people who were the right match for each other, 8 months of a life that was exactly what it appeared to be. And then Petra Ashford came back to Harwick. I noticed the change in Dren immediately. I was a healer. I was trained to notice changes. But I would have noticed this without the training, because it was not subtle, not in the way that internal changes were subtle when they were being managed. This was visible in the quality of his presence when he came to me. He was still there. He was still warm. But there was something underneath the warmth that was not warm, that was in conflict with itself in a way that I could feel through the bond like a static that hadn't been there before. I did not ask. I should have asked. I want to be honest about that. I did not ask because I was afraid of the answer, which was not my bravest moment, but was my most human one. I waited. I kept thinking, he will tell me. He will tell me what is happening, and we will deal with it honestly, the way we dealt with everything honestly, and it will be whatever it is, and we will manage it. He did not tell me. He did not tell me until the morning he sat down across from me at the kitchen table. Our kitchen table, the one in the house we had shared for 6 months, and said the words. Not the formal rejection words. He did not use those. And I want to be precise about that because the distinction mattered later, legally and practically. He said, "I can't do this." 3 words. I can't do this. I looked at him. I had been about to tell him about the pregnancy. I had been carrying the knowledge for 3 weeks, managing it on my own while I found the right moment, and I had decided that morning was the right moment. "Petra," I said. Not a question. A fact. "I loved her," he said. "Before you, before everything. She was." "I know who she is," I said. "The bond doesn't change." "Do not tell me what the bond doesn't change," I said. "Not right now." He was quiet. "There's something you need to know," I said. I told him about the pregnancy. The kitchen went very quiet. He looked at me. I looked back at him. And I watched. I want to say I watched this dispassionately, but that would be a lie. I watched with the specific anguish of someone who is watching a person they love encounter a fact that should change their course and is in the process of deciding not to let it. "I'm sorry," he said. And those 2 words told me everything. They were not the words of a man who was going to stay. They were the words of a man who had already made his choice and was asking the person he was leaving to absorb the cost of it. I left that morning. I did not have a plan. I want to be honest about that too. I had a bag. I had my medical kit. I had my car. I had 3 weeks of foreknowledge that I had used to move my most important personal documents to my briefcase. I had, apparently, been preparing to leave even while I told myself I was waiting for him to tell me the truth. The body knows. I drove north. Not back to Grayfen immediately. I needed to think, and thinking at speed on a highway was one of my better environments for it. I drove 4 hours north to the edge of the Pax territory, and then I stopped at a roadside inn, and I sat on the bed in the small room, and I looked at the ceiling. I was 24 years old. I was 8 weeks pregnant. I was alone. I had felt the mate bond, which was the most significant biological event a wolf could experience, and I was sitting alone in an inn room because the wolf on the other end of it had looked at everything it offered and chosen something else. I had 2 options. I could let this be the thing that broke me, or I could let it be the thing that clarified me. I thought about my mother, about the Grayfen patients, about the way the long winters in the western mountains did not break the wolves who lived through them, but built them into something that could endure. I thought about the child, about the weight of something I had not yet met that was already, unambiguously, the most important thing. I chose the second option. I drove south the next morning, not to Grayfen, to the valley town of Fernwick, for territory south of Harwick, where I had done a rotation during my institute training and where I knew the healer, an older woman named Corva, who had always said, "If you ever need work, you call me." I called her. She said, "Come." I went. Fernwick was the right place. I have thought about this many times in the 3 years since I arrived with 1 bag and a pregnancy, and the specific, concentrated determination of a woman who has decided to survive something and is not going to waste energy on anything that is not survival. I have thought about whether I would have chosen it if I had been choosing clearly, or whether the choice was made by a combination of circumstances and limited options and the specific accident of a prior relationship with Corva. I think I would have chosen it. Fernwick was small enough to feel held and large enough to sustain a practice. It had the specific quality of a community that had been through difficult things and developed a corresponding depth, not a sad depth, not the depth of a place defeated by its difficulty, but the depth of a place that had learned from it. The wolves there had a directness that I respected. They said what they meant. They expected the same in return. Corvo was 60 years old and had been practicing in Fernwick for 35 of those years and had, over that time, developed into the specific kind of healer that only came from 35 years of knowing the same community. She knew every wolf's history, every family's patterns, every place where there was a recurring weakness that needed ongoing attention, and every place where there was a recurring strength that could be built on. She also knew, immediately, that I was managing something significant. She did not ask about it for the first 2 weeks. On the 3rd week, after I had demonstrated that I was competent and useful and not going to become a complication in her practice, She sat down across from me after the last patient of the day and looked at me with the direct gray eyes that had always been her most distinctive feature. "Whoever he is," she said, "he is an idiot. He is the alpha of Harwick," I said. "Then he is an alpha-sized idiot," she said. I had laughed. I had not expected to laugh, and the laugh surprised me by having warmth in it rather than the brittle quality of a laugh that was covering something. "You're going to be all right," Corva said. "I know," I said. "The child? Healthy. Everything on track. And you?" I thought about it. "Figuring it out," I said. "Good enough," she said. She stood up. "Tomorrow there is a patient with a complicated rheumatic presentation I want you to look at," she said. "I've been managing it for 3 years, and I think we're missing something. Send me the file tonight," I said. She did. I read it. I found the missing thing. We treated it the following week. It worked. And I thought, all right, here I am. Here is the work. Here is what I can do. My son was born in November. I labored for 11 hours, which Corva managed with the focused competence of 35 years of attending births and the specific, quieter competence of a woman who knew that the person in the bed was also her colleague and required a different quality of presence than her other patients. She held my hand through the last hour. He arrived in the early morning, when the light was still gray and tentative, with the specific indignant sound of a person who has been comfortable and warm and has objections to the current arrangement. His name was Soren. He weighed 8 pounds and 2 ounces, and he had dark hair, Dren's dark hair, a fact I noted with the clinical honesty that I brought to most things, and then filed away in the place where I kept things that were true and painful and did not require daily revisiting. He had Dren's jaw. He had my eyes. He was the most extraordinary thing I had ever encountered. I had known, intellectually, that this would be true. I had treated women who had described their children in terms that sounded, to someone without the experience, like hyperbole. I had nodded with the appropriate warmth and filed it in the category of subjectively significant things that could not be fully communicated. I understood now. It was not hyperbole. It was the most accurate thing you could say about a child, and it was not expressible in any language adequate to it. And the only thing you could do was hold them and let the understanding happen without trying to describe it. I held him. I let it happen. And then I thought, I am going to give this person everything. Not as a compensation for what they are missing. Not to fill the absence of the father with the fullness of the mother. Just because that was the truth of what I felt, and I was a person who tried to live in alignment with what was true. The first year was the hardest. I want to be honest about that. The people who describe single parenthood with relentless positivity are either very lucky or very selective about what they share, and I am not in the habit of either luck or selectivity. The first year was hard. Sleep that came in fragments. The specific, sustained exhaustion of keeping a small person alive, while also maintaining a practice that people depended on and keeping your own internal state functional enough to do both, without critical failure. The particular loneliness of 3 in the morning when the baby was crying and you were the only person in the house. I called my parents. I called Corva. I called my brother Daff, who was 20 at the time and studying in the East, and who had the specific helpfulness of a young man who wanted to help and didn't fully know how, which produced an entertaining combination of genuinely useful practical suggestions and completely impractical romantic ones. "You should find someone," Daff told me, in the 4th month. "I have a 4-month-old," I said. "People date with 4-month-olds. Daff, I'm just saying. I know what you're saying. Go study." He went back to studying. I went back to working. By 6 months, I had a rhythm. Not the rhythm I would have designed if I had been designing a life from scratch. Something rougher, more improvised, with visible seams where the different requirements of mother and healer and person had been stitched together in the available time. But a functional rhythm. A life that was working. The bond, Dren's bond, the one that had cracked when he left and gone to its specific, permanent quiet, was fully gone by the 2nd month. I had expected it to feel like a relief. I had expected the quiet to be easier than the cracking. It was not relief. It was the specific stillness of a room where something that had been making sound stops. The absence that was shaped like a presence. I had gotten used to the sound. The quiet took longer to get used to. It took until Soren was 4 months old. At 4 months, I held him at the window in the early morning and watched the light come up over Fernwick's Valley, and the quiet felt like mine. Not the absence of something, just the sound of the life I had. I said it out loud. This is mine. Soren looked at the light. Huh, he said, which was one of his 4 words at the time. Exactly, I said. The second year was better than the first. The third was better still. I expanded the practice. Corvo was moving toward a partial retirement. Not full. She was not a woman who would ever fully retire, but she had begun stepping back from the most intensive work and giving me more of the primary patient load, which I had been ready for and which I found exactly as absorbing as I had expected. I hired an assistant. Fun, a young wolf from the pack's eastern quarter who was not medically trained but was organized and observant and had the specific quality of someone who noticed what needed doing and did it without being asked, which was worth more than formal training in the specific context of a small healer house with a complex caseload. Soren started at the pack's small nursery at 18 months, which freed 3 morning hours and which produced, over the following weeks, a different Soren. A Soren who had opinions about other children, who had a best friend named Wex who was 18 months and a half and whom he regarded as the smartest person alive, who came home from nursery with the specific energy of someone who has been engaged all morning and is ready to report. He was funny. I had not expected the humor to arrive so early. 2-year-olds had not been described to me as consistently funny, but Soren had been funny since approximately 14 months, with the specific, unintentional quality of a person who said true things in a context that made them hilarious. He told Corvo one morning that her coat smelled like dogs. Corvo's response was to look at her coat, confirm that it did in fact smell like the 2 dogs she kept, and to thank him for the assessment. He informed our neighbor, a dignified older wolf named Hadwick, that his boots were crooked. They were crooked. He had been putting them on wrong for apparently some time. He asked me, on a morning when I was running late and managing the specific controlled chaos of getting a toddler out the door, why I was making the face. What face? I asked. The fast face, he said. I laughed. He was 2.5 when Dren found us. I want to tell you how he found me. Not because it was dramatic, it wasn't. It was mundane in the specific way that the most significant things were often mundane. He had been in the Southern Territories for a council meeting. He had run into Corvo's apprentice from 20 years ago, now a senior healer herself, who had mentioned Corvo's retirement, and the extraordinary secondary practitioner who had joined the practice 3 years ago, a woman named Calla from the Northern Territories who had a specialty in rare pathology. Name spread in the healer network. My name had spread. He had come to find me, or he had told himself that. I think the fuller truth, the truth he eventually told me, in the third conversation, when he had moved past the managed versions into the actual one, was that he had been looking, not knowing he was looking. Looking in the specific way of someone who understood they had made a mistake and was not yet ready to call it that, but was also not able to stop the looking. He appeared at my garden gate on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The October afternoon. The one with the beetle. You should have called first, I said. He looked at me, then at Soren, then back at me. I know, he said. There's a gate, I said. It locks. It wasn't locked, he said. I know it wasn't locked, I said. It's a garden. He was still looking at Soren. Soren had found, somewhere in the garden, a second beetle. He was now attempting to introduce the 2 beetles, with the patient diplomacy of a child who believed all introductions could be made to work. Soren, I said. My son looked up. This is Dren, I said. I had spent 3 years deciding how I would say this if it ever happened. I had rehearsed approximately 40 different versions. The one I gave him was the plainest. His name. He is someone Mama knows. Soren considered this. Then, are you a beetle man? Dren, And I watched this very carefully, because the next 30 seconds were going to tell me a great deal. Dren crouched down to toddler level. "What's a beetle, man?" he asked. "A man who likes beetles," Soren said, as if this were obvious. "I like beetles," Dren said. This was apparently sufficient. Soren turned back to the beetles. Dren stayed crouched for a moment. Then he stood up and looked at me, and the look on his face was the most honest expression I had ever seen on him, more honest than the treatment room look when we had discussed his blood work, and he had been concerned about a reading that turned out to be nothing, more honest than the look when we had first felt the bond, and we had both sat with it for a moment before saying anything. More honest, even than the morning at the kitchen table. "Can we talk?" he asked. "I have a 2.5-year-old, I said. "We can talk in 20 minutes when he's had his snack and settled." "I can wait," he said. He waited. The snack ritual was apple slices and a small cup of warm milk, conducted at the kitchen table in the specific, serious manner of a child who took nourishment seriously. Dren sat at the far end of the table. Soren ate his apple. At one point, Soren looked at Dren, then at his apple, then at Dren again, and then pushed one of his apple slices to the far end of the table in Dren's direction. Dren looked at the apple slice, then at Soren. Soren was already back to his own eating, the gesture having been made and filed. I watched Dren pick up the apple slice and eat it. Something moved through his face. Something I did not name yet. I was not going to name things before I had enough information. Soren had his milk and then asked to go to his room, which meant he wanted to play with the farm set that Corva had given him for his second birthday, and which was currently his most significant obsession. I settled him with the farm set. I came back to the kitchen. I sat down. Dren was still at the table. He had not moved. "Talk," I said. He looked at his hands. "I left Harwick," he said. I had not known that. "When?" "8 months ago." He paused. "After Petra left." I looked at him. "She left?" I asked. "Yes." "Did she leave you? Or did you?" "She left," he said. "The bond." I had convinced myself that what I felt for her was the equivalent of the bond. That history and love and the first person you loved could produce something that was the same as the bond. And for a while I could almost believe that. He paused. And then I couldn't. I was very still. "How long did it take?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. 6 months, he said. 6 months to understand what I had done. And then 2.5 years of, he stopped. "Of what?" I asked. "Of knowing I had made the worst mistake a wolf could make," he said. "Of knowing that I had the thing that wolves spent their whole lives hoping to find, and I let something I already had, something good, something real, but not the same thing. I let it take the place of what was genuinely mine. I listened to this with the quality of attention I gave to things that were significant. And now?" I asked. "Now I am not here to ask for forgiveness," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not here to ask you to go back to what we were. I don't think that's," he stopped. "I don't think I have the right to ask for that." "Then what are you here for?" I asked. He looked at the hallway through which I had taken Soren. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "You didn't tell me You left," I said. "You sat at the kitchen table, and you said 3 words, and you left. You didn't give me the opening to tell you." "I know," he said. "I was going to tell you that morning," I said. "I had decided that morning was when I was going to tell you. And you sat down first." He closed his eyes. "I know," he said again. "He has your eyes," I said. He opened his eyes. "Your jaw," I said. "Your hands." "He has my eyes, actually." He was very still. "How is he?" he asked. "Extraordinary," I said. "The way children are extraordinary when they have been given the chance to be." He heard what I was saying underneath what I said. "I deserve that," he said. "You deserve a great deal more than that," I said. "But I'm not in the business of punishment. I'm in the business of what's next." So, I looked at him across the table. What is next? What was next was the hardest conversation I had ever had, and I had had some difficult ones. He told me everything. Not the managed version. Not the version designed to make himself look better than he deserved to look. I had asked for what was next, and he understood that what was next required honesty as its foundation, and he gave me honesty. He told me that when Petra came back, he had felt something that he had not felt since she left, the specific warmth of an old love that had not been closed properly, that had been interrupted rather than ended, and had therefore retained a weight that he had not fully understood until she was standing in front of him, and the weight was present again. He told me he had made a choice based on that feeling. A choice he had told himself was logical. The bond was biological, he had said to himself, and biology could be overridden by choice. And his history with Petra was real and valuable and sufficient, and which he had known, underneath the logic, was not right. He told me the knowing had not stopped him. He told me the knowing had started immediately after he left. Not guilt. He was not a man who was interested in performing guilt, and I was not interested in receiving a performance of it. The real thing. The actual awareness that what he had done was wrong at a fundamental level that could not be reasoned around. He told me it had taken 6 months to understand it fully. 2.5 years to find me. The finding had been, he admitted, not as hard as he had expected, or rather, he had expected it to be harder and had been preparing for a harder search, and had found me faster than he had expected because my name was in the healer network, and the healer network was not large. You've been in the network for 3 years, I said. Yes. You could have found me earlier. A pause. Yes, he said. But you didn't. No. Why not? He was quiet for a long time. Because I needed to be the person who deserved to find you before I came looking, he said. And that took the full 2.5 years. I looked at him. I did not say anything for a moment. That's the most self-aware thing you've ever said to me, I said finally. I've had 2.5 years of nothing but time to think, he said. Something in my chest shifted. Not toward him. Not yet. Not quickly. But shifted, the specific movement of a thing that has been held in one position for a long time and has just been offered permission to consider a different one. I was not going to act on that shift today. I'm going to tell you what I need, I said. Tell me. Time, I said. And proof, which is different from promises. Proof is what you do, not what you say. I don't need to hear what you're going to be. I need to watch what you are. I paused. And Soren needs. He needs you to be consistent if you're going to be in his life. I'm not going to introduce his father and then have his father become unreliable. That is the thing I will not tolerate. I understand, he said. Do you? Yes, he said. Completely. I looked at him. He likes beetles, I said. And the farm set Corva gave him. And apple slices. And a stuffed animal named Bruck who has been through several surgical interventions and is held together largely by my stitching at this point. He almost smiled. It was the first time his face had done anything that wasn't managed or fractured since he walked through the gate. Can I meet him? Dren asked. Properly. You have met him, I said. The introduction will develop at whatever pace he sets. You don't push it. You follow his lead. Yes, he said. You come back Saturday, I said. We go to the park. All 3 of us. Neutral ground. Open space. A 2-year-old's attention span limits the interaction to whatever he decides. Saturday, he said. And Dren. He looked at me. If you do anything to hurt him, I said, I will make the consequences specific and significant, and you will not see either of us again. I know, he said. Good. Saturday was a cold October morning with the specific clarity that came in the northern autumn, the kind of air that made everything look sharpened, the edges of things distinct. Soren wore his red jacket. He was very proud of the red jacket. He showed it to Dren at the gate with the specific gravity of a child presenting a significant achievement. Red, Dren said. Yes, Soren confirmed. Very red, Dren said. Soren appeared satisfied with this assessment. We went to the park. I watched from the bench while they moved through the park's geography in the specific, negotiated way of a small child leading an adult through a space they considered theirs, showing the things that were worth showing, ignoring the things that were not, occasionally pausing to deliver commentary on something that required commentary. Dren followed. Not performing. not trying to be liked, just following where Soren led, responding to what Soren said, being present in the specific, unhurried way of someone who had nowhere else to be and nothing else to want to be doing. I watched this. I thought about 3 years. About November and the gray tentative light and Soren's indignant arrival. About the first year and its difficulty and the rhythm that had emerged from it. About Fernwick and Corva and Fun and the practice that was mine, entirely mine, built from what I had brought and what I had found here. I thought about the thing that had shifted in my chest, about what it meant and what I was going to do with it, and whether it was the thing I thought it was or something that required more time to identify accurately. I was a healer. I waited for accurate information before acting. I would wait. On the far side of the park, Soren had found something on the ground that required examination. He looked up. He looked at me on the bench. Then at Dren beside him. "Mama," he called. "Yes." I called back. "Come see." I went. I crouched beside him on the other side from Dren. It was a leaf. An extraordinary autumn leaf. The specific red-gold combination that happened in the Northern Territories when the season was right. Perfectly intact, not curled or crumbled at the edges. "Look," Soren said. We both looked. "Beautiful," I said. Soren picked it up very carefully, with the specific reverence he reserved for things he considered important. He looked at it for a moment. Then he held it out to Dren. Dren took it. He looked at the leaf. He looked at my son. He looked at me. And I saw it. The thing I had been watching for. The thing that would tell me whether what was happening in my chest was data or noise. I saw it in the way he held the leaf. Not like an object. Like an offering. Like something given freely by someone who did not yet know how much the giving cost, and who did not need to know, and who was therefore doing the purest version of it. His eyes. Not fractured. Not managed. Not the controlled expression of a man in a difficult conversation. Just open. Just there. "Thank you, Soren," he said quietly. Soren had already moved on to the next thing. I stood up. I looked at Dren still holding the leaf. "You can keep it," I said. He looked at me. "Thank you," he said. And he meant both things. The months that followed were not simple. I will not pretend they were simple, because pretending would be a disservice to anyone reading or listening who is in their own complicated version of this situation and needs it told straight. He came back. The Saturdays became regular. Then weekday evenings sometimes. Then, over the following months, a presence in Soren's life that was becoming, in the gradual and irreversible way of things that were building into fact, a permanent one. Soren called him Dren. He did not know yet what Dren was to him, specifically. He knew that Dren was someone who came on Saturdays and went to the park and who had kept the leaf and who, on one extraordinary occasion, had produced from his coat pocket a small wooden beetle that he had apparently carved himself, which Soren had received with the reverence of someone being given something sacred. I did not tell Soren the full truth yet. He was 2.5. The full truth was something he would receive when he had the capacity to hold it, which was not yet, but was coming. What I was watching was whether Dren was building the thing that would make that conversation, when it came, something other than a wound. He was building it. Not perfectly. He made mistakes. The specific, genuine mistakes of a man who was learning a child from the beginning rather than from birth, who did not always know where the edges were, who occasionally pushed when he should have followed or withdrew when he should have stayed. I corrected him. He received the corrections without resentment, which was the thing I had been watching for, not the absence of mistakes, because mistakes were information and information was useful. The thing I was watching for was what happened to the corrections, whether he heard them and adjusted, or whether he heard them and managed them. He heard them and adjusted. Every time. The conversation about us, the specific, direct, necessary conversation about what was happening between him and me and not just between him and Soren, happened in February. For months after the gate. We were in the kitchen after Soren was asleep. I had made tea. This had become its own kind of habit. The tea after Soren was asleep, the specific domestic regularity of it. He had been looking at me with the direct eyes for about 20 minutes while pretending to read a journal I had left on the table. "Stop pretending to read the journal," I said. He put it down. "I want to say something," he said. "Say it," I said. "I am not asking for what was," he said. "I know what was is gone. I know the bond, the formal bond, is gone. I understand that I am here on whatever terms you said, and that those terms are not negotiable, and I am not going to negotiate them." He paused. "But I want to tell you something that is true and that I need you to have." I waited. "You built a remarkable life," he said. "You built it alone, in 3 years, from nothing but what you brought and what you found here. And you built it specifically for him. And it is, every time I walk into this house, into this life, I see what you chose to make when the choice was entirely yours." He paused again. "And I want you to know that I see it. Not as evidence of what I cost you. As evidence of who you are." I looked at him. "That is the most accurate thing you have said to me," I said. "I've been working on accuracy," he said. "I know," I said. "I've noticed." A silence. "And what I built," I said carefully, "is mine. I need you to understand that the building is not going to stop being mine because you are here. Whatever this is, whatever we are, it exists alongside what I built, not instead of it." "I understand that," he said. "Do you understand what that means practically?" I asked. "It means I make decisions about Soren and this practice and this life, and I make them as the person who built it, who has been making them alone. You have input when I invite input. You don't have default authority here because of what you are to me or what you were." "Yes," he said. "And it means that if this, whatever this is, if it doesn't work, it ends cleanly. I don't rebuild around loss again. I have learned to build forward." "Yes," he said again. I looked at him. I thought about the leaf. About the beetle carved from wood sitting on Soren's shelf beside Bruck, the surgically repaired stuffed animal. About what data was and what noise was and which of these things I was looking at. "All right," I said. "All right," he asked. "All right," meaning, "We see what this is," I said. "We find out together. At the pace the finding out requires." His face did the open thing. "Yes," he said. "And you stop pretending to read my journals when you want to have a conversation?" I said. "Yes," he said again. I picked up my tea. "The August case," I said. "The one with the complicated rheumatic presentation. I've been thinking about the third quarter's results, and I want to talk through the adjustment to the protocol." He blinked. "We're talking about a case?" he said. "You studied wolf medicine at the Institute," I said. "I want a second opinion." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Tell me about the case." I told him about the case. He listened. He had opinions. They were good opinions. We talked for 2 hours. Soren slept through all of it. "I want to tell you what happened to Dren. Not what happened to us. That was still being built, still finding its shape, still in the specific early days of something that had not yet declared itself fully. But what happened to him in the 3 years he was not with us. He told me over the course of many evenings, in the gradual way that a person told things when they were telling the truth rather than a version of it. He had left Harwick 8 months before finding me, as he had said. He had left because Petra had left, and because when Petra left he had been standing in the space she had occupied and looking at what was there and finding that there was very little. Not in Harwick. Harwick was intact. His pack, his wolves, the responsibilities that had always given his days their shape. All of that was there. But inside him, there was very little inside him. He had spent the first year after leaving me in the performance of a life, the governance, the decisions, the public function of an alpha in a time when the pack was navigating some significant structural changes. He had done the work. The work was done well. And every morning he had woken up and felt the specific, permanent quiet of the absent bond. He had not understood, until the bond was gone, how much of his ambient sense of rightness had come from it. The bond had been the background frequency of everything for 8 months, and its absence was not simply the absence of a feeling. It was the absence of a signal that had been orienting him without his knowing he was being oriented. He had spent the second year trying to understand what that meant. trying to separate the grief from the biology, the regret from the loss, the specific pain of having done a wrong thing from the separate pain of having lost the bond's guidance. He had not been fully successful at the separation. He had been, he admitted, a man in sustained difficulty for 2.5 years. Not broken. The work had kept him functional, and there were the people of Harwick who depended on him, and dependency was a reason to stay functional that he had honored. But difficult. The kind of difficult that left evidence in the face. I had seen the evidence. I had been looking at it since the gate. I had not been softened by it. I want to be clear about that. His difficulty was the consequence of his choice, and I had not spent 3 years building a life and raising a son in order to be softened by watching someone experience the natural consequences of a wrong decision. But I had noted it. As data. The data said, he understood what he had done. The data said, the understanding had been sustained, not managed. The data said, he was not the man who had left me at a kitchen table. The data also said, he needed to prove it, and proving it was measured in time and consistency, and we were in the early part of the measuring. By summer, Soren knew. Not the full story. The full story was something I was going to give him as he grew into it, a piece at a time, at the pace of his ability to hold it. But the essential fact. I had sat with him one morning in the garden, in the same garden where the whole thing had started, with the late summer light doing its specific thing with the leaves and Soren in his mud-covered boots, and Bruck the survivor, sitting on the garden wall. Soren, I said. He looked up. Dren is your papa, I said. Plainly. Without the emotional weight of it in my voice, because he was 3 now, and what he needed was the fact. And the fact was simple even if everything around it was complicated. He looked at me. He processed this. He looked toward the house, where Dren was inside washing the dishes from lunch. Is he going to live here? Soren asked. He lives nearby, I said. Can he come on Tuesdays? Saturdays had become Saturdays and Tuesdays. He already comes on Tuesdays, I said. Good, Soren said. He went back to the garden's current project, which was a complex construction involving stones and sticks that I had not yet decoded. I sat with the plainness of that. The 3-year-old's plainness. Dren is your papa. Oh, can he come on Tuesdays? He already does. Good. Not simple. Nothing about it was simple. But the child's version of it was simple. The child's version said, here is the information, here is what I need, let's move forward. Children were wiser than everyone gave them credit for. When I told Dren what Soren had said, he was quiet for a long time. We were in the kitchen again. It was late. The Tuesday evening after. He was looking at the table. He just accepted it, Dren said. He's 3, I said. He doesn't have the architecture yet to make it complicated. Adults make it complicated, he said. Yes, I said. We do. He was quiet. How do I? He stopped. I don't know how to be a father. I didn't grow up watching, he paused. My father was not a good model for this. I know, I said. I know the files. He looked at me. The Pax Alpha succession documents, I said. I read them in my first week at Harwick. Standard professional preparation. You read my father's governance record for professional preparation. He was a difficult alpha, I said. The record reflected it. He shook his head. How are you always already 3 steps ahead? I read things, I said. He almost smiled. I looked at him. You are not going to be your father, I said. You are going to be whatever kind of father you decide to be, informed by all the things you know, including the things you know about what not to do. And Soren is going to tell you, in the extremely direct way that Soren tells people things when you are getting it wrong. You listen to him. The same way you listen to me. Yes, he said. And you get to get it wrong sometimes, I said. That is allowed. What's not allowed is getting it wrong and not acknowledging it. I understand, he said. Good, I said. I looked at the kitchen table. The kitchen table that was mine. In the kitchen that was mine. In the life I had built. Dren, I said. Yes. Don't make me regret this. He looked at me. I won't, he said. I believed him. Not because he had earned the belief completely yet. Some things take longer than a few months to earn. but because I was a healer and I read bodies as much as I read minds. And the body in front of me was the body of a man who was committed to a thing with the specific quality of someone who had looked at what it cost to not be committed and had decided they were not paying that again. I believed him because the data said to. And because he had eaten my son's apple slice without being asked to. And because he had held a leaf like it was an offering. And because some things were true before the proof was complete. There is something the old wolf traditions said about the bond that most modern wolves no longer discussed. Because the modern wolf world preferred cleaner narratives, and the old traditions were complicated. The old traditions said, the bond was not a guarantee of the life. It was a designation of the person. What you did with the designation was yours. Two wolves could be bonded and have a terrible life together if they chose to build badly. Two wolves could lose the formal bond. Through rejection, through distance, through the specific fractures that life produced, and build something extraordinary from what remained. The bond was the starting point. What came after was choice. Every day, every Tuesday, every October morning in a cold garden with a red-jacketed toddler who showed you beetles and handed you leaves and called you by your first name with the easy certainty of someone who had decided you were allowed to be there. Every cup of tea in the late evening when the child was asleep and there was work to discuss, and then, after the work, there was the life to discuss, and the life was larger and more real than anything either of them could have built alone. The choice was made every day, in the small things. The apple slices. The journals not pretended to be read. The corrections received without resentment. The truth told, finally, fully, in real time rather than in the managed version. The leaf, held like it was sacred. Because it was. If you stayed with Calla and Soren and Dren from the garden gate to the kitchen table, from the October leaf to the summer morning when she said the words simply and her son said good, then you already know what I am about to say. This story was not about getting him back. It was about what she built while he was gone. The practice, the rhythm, the red jacket and the park and Bruck the survivor, and 3 years of Tuesday mornings and every choice she made alone, for herself and for her son, before anyone came to the gate. When he found her, she had already found herself. And that is the only order it could have worked in. Because the version of Calla who drove away from that kitchen table, devastated, pregnant, alone, was already someone. She was always someone. And the version of her who opened the garden gate 3 years later was someone who knew exactly who she was, and what she had, and what she was not going to give away. And that woman was worth finding. She had always been worth finding. He just had to become the man worth letting in. This channel is here every day for the women who are building. For everyone who left a kitchen table with nothing but what they brought, and went somewhere, and made something. For the ones who are in the first year, and it's hard. And for the ones in the second year where the rhythm is beginning. And for the ones in the third year where something in the chest finally says, this is mine. Subscribe. Hit that bell. Drop your location in the comments. I need to know where in the world someone needed to hear Calla's story today. Because you are everywhere. And this story was yours too. Come back tomorrow. The next story starts with someone at a gate. It ends with something that was always going to be built. See you there.